Paul Gauguin was born in Paris in 1848, died in 1903. His work is mainly associated with the post-impressionists. Gauguin's family, his father was a journalist, fled to Peru when he was just 2 years old because of the political situation in Paris. His mother had relations in South America, which is why they ended up there. Up to the age of 6, he had an affluent upbringing, but financial and local difficulties eventually drove his widowed mother back to France when he grew up to earn a good living as a stockbroker and painted in his spare time. A financial crisis in 1882, when the stock market crashed, significantly impacted his career, and this prompted him to turn to painting full-time. In 1873, he married a Danish woman named Mette Gad, and over the next 10 years, they had 5 children. So here are 2 portraits of his wife. As regards his skill as a painter, he was largely self-taught, but his entry into the art world proper, as it were, was mostly due to his acquaintance with Camille Pissarro, who mentored him and introduced him to the Parisian artist colony, largely dominated by the Impressionists at that time, of course, and with whom he exhibited in the 1880s. This is one of his first exhibits, houses at Vaugirard, or Vaugirard. I'm not sure whether that's a hard or a soft G. Gauguin also showed paintings in the Impressionist exhibitions of 1881 and 1882, but with very little success. Suzanne's sewing was one of these, but it failed to sell, and his wife refused to hang it in their home. Rather a good painting, I think. And I don't know who Suzanne was. She's probably a model. She appears to be pregnant. Another of his exhibits was the market gardens of Vaugirard. So you can see very much the Impressionist style that he adopted at first hand under the guiding hand of Pissarro, presumably, and those he was mixing with in the artist colony in Paris at the time. And there was also this winter landscape, which he exhibited very obviously in the Impressionist style. It's very subtle painting, this, really. The houses in the background towards the top are just suggested with a very, very light wash of lilac, as you can see. There's a house there, a roof there, and a large house there, and a wall at that point. The following year, he wrote to Pissarro to say he was definitely going to paint full-time. In 1883, he moved his family to Rouen, where they would live more cheaply. It was then he became friendly with Cézanne, whom he much admired. They painted together with Pissarro. However, by the end of the year, Mette and the children had moved back to Copenhagen, and Gauguin followed them shortly afterwards. He stayed there for a while, but the marriage was already failing. And as a consequence, Mette urged Gauguin to return to Paris. I suggest he probably didn't raise too many objections, which is obviously where his heart was amongst the other painters. At Rouen, he painted women bathing, but little else of note. It was exhibited in the same exhibition, which established Georges Seurat as leader of the avant-garde movement in Paris. Gauguin, however, was contemptuous of his pointillist technique. We're told Gauguin was often confrontational. He was both an accomplished pugilist and a sword fencer. In 1886, he moved to Brittany and joined the artists' colony of Pont-Aven, where he gained popularity among the younger painters, mainly because of his outlandish appearance. It set him apart and appealed to the radical young. Not a very distinguished painting, this one, I don't think. He mainly painted landscapes, such as this one, the Breton shepherdess. Again, the Impressionist style is very much in evidence. Look at the sweep of the foliage in the background towards the top there. In fact, is almost following a curve. And the colours were not what we expect from Gauguin. They're quite muted. And we've got the shepherdess sitting there with looks to be like a dog, and there's another gentleman over here. Whether they're having a conversation at distance, I don't know. But this is Gauguin very much experimenting with various styles. He also painted young Breton boys bathing, where we can clearly see a leap forward in Gauguin's technique, in his bold use of pure colour, which point towards his later style. Quite strong greens there, and the orange of this roof pulls the eye into the center of the painting. Notice how the flesh tones are anything but flesh tones, except perhaps for this leg. But this lad sitting on the towel on the beach, his skin is almost yellow. It's a very, very pale yellow. So again, Gauguin very much in experimental mode. For Breton women also shows a marked departure from his earlier Impressionist style. The forms have been deliberately flattened and the colours saturated. One can see the residual influence of Cézanne in that. There's a deliberate suppression of perspective. No horizon is offered, as you can see. They're grouped in a quartet, a tidy little quartet, almost centre to the painting, but we've got this man walking away on the top right-hand corner there, under the arch of this tree, to avoid a symmetry, so it's making the painting asymmetric. You got a nice orange dress there with the Breton lady, and the white is outstanding. Of course, the white of their headdress is quite outstanding. painting has a primitive feel about it. One might also say naive, and signposts us towards the later Tahitian paintings. And we can see a progression again in Gauguin's style here, with this flat, pale orange color for the land, the earth, as it were. The painting is thought to have given rise to the symbolist movement championed by Émile Bernard, who also pointed out the general influence of Japanese prints on Gauguin's work. Gauguin makes use of Breton themes, while at the same time leaning towards symbolism and abstraction. The Breton women, one of whom positions her hands in prayer, there we are, we can see in the bottom left-hand corner, are wearing a variety of white hats, traditional dress, I would imagine, and seem to be the ones having the vision of Jacob wrestling with an angel. So what Gauguin is suggesting is that this is a vision taken from the Old Testament, is it not? I'm not quite sure what book is. It might be as early as Genesis. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, it's quite a remarked on episode in the Old Testament. So what he's suggesting is that they're all praying in this arc, this semicircle of Breton ladies are praying, and as a result, they're achieving this vision of the angel struggling with Jacob. He's certainly moving away from perspective and also from representational art. I mean, look at the color of the tree in the center there. Gauguin was clearly disillusioned with Impressionism at this time. He wrote later, and I'm quoting Gauguin now, "The Impressionists study color exclusively, but without freedom, always shackled by the need of probability." So by that I take it to the need to paint something that is in part representation. He considered it too imitative. Under the influence of folk art and Japanese prints, which were becoming very popular at that time, his work evolved towards a method of painting flat colors, of flat areas of pure color with bold outlines, as in the Yellow Christ. Now, this is a stark contrast to what we've seen of his earlier work. And again, as with the boy bathers, no attempt to paint realistic flesh tones. He's quite happy to use a light citric yellow, I would say, but nevertheless, it's picked up in the landscape in the middle distance there. And notice the trees, they're not green at all, are they? They're very definite. They're very definitely experimenting with color here. So the trees are red. He's got blue in the background there to suggest distance. And the three women round the cross there representing, I suppose, Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary and his mother. They're brightly painted. This combination of orange and a bold, almost Prussian blue, he uses that quite a lot, as we shall see. It works very well. I think those two colors work extremely well. It's said that in this painting, at one stroke, he did away with the classical principles of post-Renaissance art. In 1887, Gauguin left France, heading for Panama to lead an idyllic life away from it all, but he quickly ran out of money and found himself working in the construction or on the construction of the Panama Canal. He wrote to his wife, "I have to dig from 5:30 in the morning to 6 in the evening under the tropical sun and rain. At night, I am devoured by mosquitoes." So we'll find that as far as his domestic situation is concerned, she is in Copenhagen and he's eventually going to end up in Tahiti, but they are estranged, and the marriage has failed for all intents and purposes, but they're still in contact with each other. And he's still, they're never divorced. In Panama City, he was at a low point, exemplified by the fact that he was arrested and fined for urinating in public at one stage. He later also became very ill with fever. When he eventually recovered, he decided to move on to Martinique, where he produced this landscape. It was here he began juxtaposing colours in close proximity to achieve a muted effect. Shortly after this, he made his breakthrough to non-representational painting, if he hadn't already done it. This displeased Pissarro and led to an end in their relationship. Moving away from Impressionism, Gauguin explained, and I quote, "Don't copy nature too literally. Art is an abstraction. Derive it from nature as you dream in nature's presence, and think more about the act of creation and the outcome." Gauguin finished 11 paintings during his stay on the island of Martinique. He lived in a small hut, which he shared with his artist friend Laval. They were loosely painted paintings and depicted outdoor scenes of locals working, as in this one, among the mangoes. So now we can see certainly color is predominant in Gauguin's paintings. Bright colors. And the locals obviously are picking mangoes from the trees. He still hasn't shrugged off Impressionism completely. Look at this woman's skirt here, and this woman here, done with quick strokes, I would suggest. And the folds in her dress not strongly delineated at all. Gauguin's Martinique paintings were very much admired by Vincent van Gogh and his art dealer brother Theo, who purchased 3 of them for 900 francs and arranged to have them hung at Goupil's art gallery in Paris, thus introducing Gauguin for the first time to wealthy clients. Both brothers became close friends of Gauguin for a time, and Vincent and Gauguin would paint together in Arles at Theo's instigation until one evening in 1888, when Vincent threatened Gauguin with a razor. It was the same night that Vincent later famously cut off his ear and gave it to a whore. Not surprisingly, Gauguin left Arles in a huge hurry, and they never saw each other again, though they did correspond from time to time. It now fell to Degas to be Gauguin's longest lasting friend. He was one of Gauguin's earliest supporters in Paris and persuaded the art dealer Paul Durand-Ruel to champion his work with an exhibition in 1893. However, his paintings were not well received. In fact, Monet, Renoir, and Pissarro were particularly scathing. Maybe a bit of sour grapes in so much as he'd abandoned Impressionism at that point. However, in 1891, a successful auction of Gauguin's paintings, along with other fundraising events, raised enough capital to fund a project he had conceived, that of traveling to Tahiti to paint. He had for a long time craved a primitive island life and was not unattracted by rumors that the young women of Tahiti were of a particularly amorous disposition. But first, he visited his family in Copenhagen for what turned out to be the last time, and then set sail. Once in Polynesia, after a brief visit to the capital, Pepet, he set up a studio in a bamboo hut some 30 miles from the capital and began to paint. In the first year, he produced this painting, Ave Maria. It's an imaginative symbolist painting, as you can see. The two Tahitian women in the middle ground there are praying so intensely that he imagines they have evoked the Madonna and Child identified by their halos. So they both got halos. They're quite subtle halos, but they are there. It's a bit like the Breton ladies imagining evoking the vision of Jacob wrestling with the angel. So that is the explanation of this painting. So this is the Madonna and Child, though it gets, if you're not confused already, you're going to get even more confused in a moment. Notice the presence of the exotic fruit in the foreground and the strange position of the child on the mother's shoulders. We've never seen a Madonna and Child in quite that position before, though this is a symbolic painting. Gauguin tells us confusingly there is an angel standing behind the two native women, which transforms this picture into a representation of the Annunciation, and that the two figures on the right are indeed Mary and Jesus. Now, I'm not so too au fait with the Bible, I have to confess, but I'm pretty sure the Annunciation came before the birth of Christ. So that doesn't make sense. And if you can see the angel behind I'm only guessing it's this vague nebulous outline here, or well, not even an outline, is it? Just blocked colours and obscured by the foliage. There does seem to be a sort of wing, a yellow wing at that point. But anyway, Gauguin himself says that there is an angel there. And if you can see it, you've got better eyes than I have. The following year, he painted By the Sea. It's an exotic scene, probably representing the sort of tropical paradise Gauguin had hoped to find in French Polynesia. He painted it in bright, rich, unmixed colours using flat areas, as you can see, a technique he'd already used in Britain. He'd experimented with in the paintings he produced in Brittany. Gauguin would apply a thin layer of clear wax to the surface of these Tahitian paintings. So the colours are very powerful in this. He's fond of the yellow there, and we got the orange and well, it's lilac really rather than blue, but there's certainly blue in the water there of the sea. Not quite sure what this figure. Well, this figure must be bathing in the sea, I suppose. But this is non-representational art now, so we mustn't look for too much detail in it, I don't think. In fact, I take this dark shape here to be a log effect or something, fallen log. It almost looks like a prehistoric animal. Now, this is thought to be his first portrait of a Tahitian woman. And again, you can see the clothes that she's wearing are, they're not painted in any great detail. And we've got that yellow in the background again, then it's very strong yellow and the reds. So he's really striving for bright paintings. And this is followed by When Will You Marry? Now, this painting in 2014 sold for $210 million. And now he's well into painting the young women of Tahiti. Because these paintings are painted in a similar, unique, idiosyncratic style, which we apply to Gauguin, there's not, I can't make too many comments about them really. They're variations on a theme, a lot of them. Over the next year, he produced some 20 paintings, sending 9 to Paris, the first of which was this one, The Seed of Aroe, or Aroi. Not sure how you pronounce that. This is a rather more muted painting, as you can see. In fact, in no attempt at flesh colours on this occasion. He's painted her rather dark. It's quite a large painting. It's by 3 foot by 2'6", something like that. In case you're wondering, Aroi is a Polynesian goddess. Moma, and you can see that that's where the painting hangs. Moma tells us, and I quote, "In the original myth of the Aroi, a Polynesian secret society, a male sun god mates with the most beautiful of all women, Variomati, to found a new race. By painting his Tahitian 13-year-old mistress come wife as Variomati, Gauguin implies a continuity between the island's past and its life during his own stay there." That's what Moma tells us about it. So he's used as his model there his well, I'll explain. He's not exactly his wife in the sense that we would understand the wife. According to his own written account in a book called Noah Noah, he had taken Tehermana to be his native wife, or Vaheen, as these native girls were called. Now, Vaheens apparently were always young, 13 or 14, something like around about there. And they were arranged marriages to the advantage of the parents, no doubt. We're told that this particular marriage was arranged and consummated all in one day. And it was not uncommon among French colonists to take an underage wife. In fact, Tehermana had a child by Gauguin, but we're told on his second visit to Tahiti in 1895, it was her who chose not to continue their relationship. Gauguin later took 2 subsequent Vaheens on his second trip. And we should also note the fact that the French authorities did not consider these marriages to be legally binding. Joyousness. So his paintings were eventually exhibited in Copenhagen in a joint exhibition with the late Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh had died at this stage. Two were sold. Tehermana posed for him in several of his paintings. Notice the very strong orange color that he's given to the dog here, which dominates the painting. The girl, right in absolute dead center with the pale lilac dress appears to be playing some musical instrument, while the other one is looking on at the artist with a sort of blank expression on her face. This is Tehermana again in a missionary dress and holding a Samoan fan. We've got this curious little figure in the background there, which could be a sculptor. We know that Gauguin was sculpting at this time, so it could be a sculpture of Gauguin's. And as she's moved, instead of being centered to this painting, she's moved slightly to the right in order for him to paint that. So clearly he wanted the figure to be seen. And this is a wood sculpture he made of Tehermana. This can be seen in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, of course. This next painting is a curious painting. It's called Spirit of the Dead Watching. Gauguin explains the painting's genesis thus, and I quote, "Arriving home one night, he found her immobile." This is Tehermana again. "He found her immobile, naked, lying face down flat on the bed, with the eyes inordinately large with fear. Might she not, with my frightening face, take me for one of the demons and spectres with which the legends of her race people sleepless nights?" That's how Gauguin explains the painting. It may well have been Gauguin she was indeed frightened of. It is known that he had physically abused his legal wife, Meta, estranged back in Copenhagen. In a letter to Meta concerning this painting, he wrote, and I quote, "I painted a nude of a young girl. In this position, she is on the verge of being indecent, but I want it that way. The lines and movement are interesting to me, and so I give her, in depicting the head, a bit of a fright. Traditionally, these people have great fear of spirits of the dead." According to Gauguin, the phosphorescences emitted by mushrooms, which grew on the trees, could be seen in Tahiti at night, and the natives believed them to be the spirits of the dead. So we've got a rather sinister, I mean, a rather sinister figure here, who we must take to be one of these spirits watching over her while she sleeps. Quite a large painting, and I think this would symbolize the phosphorescences as he explains them. Siesta. The Met where this hangs tells us, and I quote, "Gauguin worked on this painting over an extended period, incorporating numerous changes. The skirt of the woman in the foreground, for example, was originally bright red. There was a dog in the position now occupied by the basket," that would be the basket there at lower right, "and the woman seated at the left edge of the porch was previously situated further on the left." His favourite orange colour is there much in evidence. And I think we can see influence of Cézanne in the foliage and on the top of the painting. In 1893, he painted this landscape. It was about this time that Gauguin was diagnosed with heart problems. He was already suffering from advanced syphilis from a contact in France. It was in this year that Gauguin decided to leave Tahiti and return to his homeland, where he still continued to paint Polynesian canvases. So there's a very colourful Tahitian landscape there. I haven't got the dimensions, so I don't know how large this painting is. I wouldn't imagine it would be particularly large. And there we've got a bit of human interest there with this man wending his way across a field, carrying something on his shoulders. But apart from that, it's pretty well all landscape. The Day of the God. The dramatic use of colour surely signposts the way forward to the fauve movement of the early 20th century. We can see it quite easy. It's quite clearly a step to the very bright, colourful fauve paintings that came at the very early part of the 20th century. So 10 years after this painting, but Matisse and Daran and de Chérico, but no doubt they would. It's reasonable to suppose that they would have seen Gauguin's paintings and would have been influenced by his bright use of colour. The two natives in the background here seem to be doing some sort of native ritual dance. There's a lot of symmetry in this painting as well. Look at these two figures either side of the central figure. Sacred Spring, Sweet Dreams featured in an exhibition organized that year by Duran Ruel Gallery. He sold 11 out of 40 exhibited there. On his return to Paris, Gauguin had set himself up in the Montparnasse district, and it's said he dressed in Polynesian garb usually, and had an affair with a teenage girl who was half Indian and half Malayan. And here are some photos of Gauguin at the time. So Gauguin clearly on Tahiti on the left there, and in pensive mood in the middle, and playing the piano without any trousers for some extraordinary reason. So he presumably was just having a bit of fun on that occasion. At this time, he and his wife Meta were irrevocably separated. And in 1895, Gauguin returned once more to Tahiti and joined an artist colony not far from the capital, living in a large reed and thatched dwelling which incorporated a studio. He was never to return to Europe. He was unable to support himself he was able to support himself from the proceeds of sales and the support of his friends. And obviously, he must have arranged some sort of conveyor belt system to get his paintings back to the galleries in Paris, where they sold well, and provided him with an income on which he could live. During the next 6 years, he kept in touch with the art world through these dealers and patrons in Paris. After the first year of little activity, he began to produce such paintings as Son of God, where he has given the nativity scene a Polynesian setting, hoping to appeal to his fellow colonists in Papet to preserve what was left of the island culture. So here we've got the stable, or the Polynesian virtue of the stable there, and we've got the Virgin Mary having given birth to Jesus, and there's Jesus with this character here. This could be Joseph, we don't know. What looks to be a totem pole there on the left. And she's lying on yellow again, very pale yellow, but he's very keen on pale yellow, and he's given her a yellow halo as well, the Virgin Mary. This painting is called Nevermore and owes its title and theme to Edgar Allan's poem of the same name, which involves, no, not of the same name, sorry, the poem is called The Raven. Wait a minute, I've got to get back to where I was. There we are. There's the Raven, looking rather like a cartoon bird. And these two rather sinister characters are chatting away behind her where she's lying. At the time of the painting, Pahura, another teenager he had taken as a wife, was grieving the loss of her first child by Gauguin. He claimed the bird represented a bird of the devil who watches. This painting, curiously, was once owned by Delius, the composer. During these first years of his return, Gauguin spent some considerable time in hospital. While he'd been in France, his ankle had been shattered in a drunken brawl, and the injury had never healed properly. Gauguin was clearly a bit of a rabble rouser when he'd had too much to drink, possibly. The uncompromising progress of syphilis was another factor, of course. In 1897, he received word that his daughter Aline had died in Denmark from pneumonia, and this deeply affected him. Shortly after this, he actually attempted to kill himself with poison. This self-portrait of around that time expresses his deep despair. It's almost as though he's wearing sackcloth and ashes, whether he's consumed by guilt or not being with his family at his daughter's death. I don't know. That's certainly a very sobering portrait. Yet at the end of the year, he completed this huge canvas, Where Do We Come From? And I mean, this is huge. This is 12 foot long by certainly nearly 5 foot. For commentary on this painting, I'm unashamedly quoting Wikipedia here. Wiki has to say the three crouched women with a sleeping child on the right represent the beginning of life. That's these women here. The middle group symbolizes the daily existence of young adulthood. Well, I assume that to be referred to these characters. And the final group, according to the artist, and they're quoting Gauguin here, or the Wikipedia's quoting Gauguin here, the old woman approaching death appears reconciled and is resigned to her thoughts. There's the old woman right on the extreme left there. At her feet, a strange white bird. I'm not quite sure what that symbolizes. Possibly symbolizing the futility of words or the uselessness of vain words. Together, the painting from right to left suggests the cycle of birth, sin, and death. So birth, there's the birth, sin, plucking the apple, Eve plucking the apple from the tree, the forbidden fruit, and death symbolized by this woman with her hands to her ears in deep despair. The blue idol in the background represents what Gauguin described as the beyond. That's the blue idol there. So this is a huge canvas, and I'm sure it would be impressive if we could ever get to Boston, USA, to stand in front of it. Where Do We Come From was exhibited at Vollard's gallery in Paris in November of the following year, along with 8 other paintings. This was his first major exhibition since his Durand-Ruel show in 1893, and it earned him considerable praise. Critics commented on a new serenity in his art. His steady income enabled him to resettle in the Marquesas Islands in search of yet more primitive society. Parura, with whom he had 2 children now, refused to accompany him. It's interesting to note that when Somerset Maugham sought her out in 1917, she could offer him no useful memory of Gauguin. I leave you to draw your own conclusions from that. Gauguin settled then in Atuona, the administrative capital of the island group, in 1901. He built himself a house and studio on 2 floors. There was no doctor, but 2 healthcare workers. Gauguin lost no time in acquiring another Vahine, or mistress stroke wife, this time a schoolgirl named Vaihoho, aged again 14. By November, they had settled in his new home. She eventually gave him a daughter whose descendants still live there to this day. At first, he gave riotous parties for the natives who took him to their hearts. But then he settled down to work, and by the end of April was able to send another 20 more canvases to Valar, to the Valar studio. Girl with a Fan features Toho Toa, the beautiful red-headed wife of the local witch doctor. And this painting, as you can see, was worked up from a photograph. So I've included the photograph there for you to make the comparison. He's given her a completely different chair to sit in, but the fan is pretty much the same. Le Saucier Diva Oa, painted in 1902, a man in a red cape. The model for the sorcerer may have been Haha Puani, an accomplished dancer as well as a feared magician, we're told. Notice again the combination of bright orange and dark, rich blue, Prussian blue, I suspect, which I always think works very well as a combination. It's certainly making this an outstanding painting, but quite what this animal is on the bottom left, I'm not sure. It appears to have horns, so it could be I don't know what it is. It's just a figment of Gauguin's imagination, I would say. The third picture of this trio, called Primitive Tales, is the beautiful Toa again on the right. The figure on the left, this figure here, with his chin in his hand, in his fist, in his palm of his hand, is Jacob Meyer de Haan, a painter friend, apparently, while the middle figure has been identified by some as Hahapuani. These paintings reached Volar after Gauguin's death. Riders on the Beach was painted on the shore of Atuana, which he could see from his home, and owes something to Degas in its isolation of the figures and the clarity of line which distinguishes each horse. While the brushstrokes and choice of colours reach back to the Impressionists, the pink of the foreground points most assuredly towards the Fauves. So it's quite a departure, apart from the composition of the painting, it's quite a departure from Degas. There's not much similarity between Degas' racing paintings, and of course we got this bright yellow there and ochre colours there. Still life with exotic birds. A very colourful painting again, as you can see. The terracotta idol at the back was made by Gauguin himself. The Russian industrialist Ivan Morozov bought it for 27,000 francs, we're told, but his collection was seized by the state after the October Revolution in 1917. This is why the painting is in Russia today. You can see at the bottom, it's in the Pushkin museum. Quite outstanding, this painting, literally outstanding. I mean, everything stands out from it. As opposed to this rather more muted offering, landscape with a pig and horse. He's almost reverted to the Impressionist style again at the end of his life. By September 1902, Gauguin's health again took a turn for the worse. The pain in his legs was so unremitting that he resorted to morphine injections, and even more worrying, his sight was also beginning to fail, which might account for the muted colours in this painting. Vioho left to have his baby amongst her family, but never returned, despite Gauguin being weak and in great pain. He died suddenly on the morning of the 8th of May in 1903, still in his 40s, probably from a heart attack, and he was buried the next day. And there's a picture of Gauguin's grave with one of his sculptures in the background, as you can see. Gauguin died intestate, and his letters, manuscripts, and paintings were auctioned in Papette on the 5th of September 1903. One of the paintings sold in Papette was this one, Maternité 2, he's called it. Very typically Gauguin painting. I think we'd all recognize that as a Gauguin painting with the very powerful colors and combination of colors, the yellows and the orange, and the native girls, of course, the Tahitian girls. This painting was sold at Sotheby's in 2004 for $39 million. His wife met a Gauguin, and she still was his wife. In due course, received proceeds from the auction, which came to some 4,000 francs. Not quite sure how that equates in modern money. In an interview with L'Echo de Paris, published in 1895, Gauguin had written, "Every feature in my paintings is carefully considered and calculated in advance, just as in a musical composition, if you like. My simple object, which I take from daily life or from nature, is merely a pretext which helps me by the means of a definite arrangement of lines and colors to create symphonies and harmonies. They have no counterparts at all in reality, in the vulgar sense of that word. They do not give direct expression to any idea. Their only purpose is to stimulate the imagination. Simply by that mysterious affinity which exists between certain arrangements of colors and lines and our minds." I think that's a very interesting summation in his own words of what he was trying to achieve with his art during his life. And just as a footnote, I'd add this about the Moon and Sixpence. Gauguin's life inspired Somerset Maugham's novel, The Moon and Sixpence. Maugham visited Tahiti in 1914 and met people who had known Gauguin. He wrote the Moon and Sixpence. This is more. I'm quoting Maugham now. The Moon and Sixpence is founded on what I had heard about him, Gauguin, but I used only the main facts of his story, and for the rest trusted to such gifts of invention as I was fortunate enough to possess. I met men who had known him and heard much about him. it occurred to me that there was, in what I was told, the subject of a novel. And with regards to the enigmatic title of the novel, A Moon and Sixpence, according to a 1956 letter written by Moore, he says, "If you look on the ground in search of a sixpence, you don't look up, and so you miss the moon.